yesterday, yesterday afternoon in the Dominican Republic while he was doing shooting a film.
This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on May 26, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. So first, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to this podcast show anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. And on that page, you can scroll down, hear the most recent show, either live as it's happening or recorded, or you can search the archive listings for past shows that you may have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. Separately, I would encourage you to follow me, which is different from a like now, on Facebook. If you follow my page, I think you get more immediate updates from it, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul. And that's where you can sign up for my newsletter, Conversations About Consciousness, as well. And I continue to offer my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners only for $99. And this reading is for those of you who are interested in astrology and want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart, which is essentially a snapshot of the exact positions of the planets at the precise moment and location of your birth. And it's this horoscope or natal chart, the terms are somewhat synonymous, that reveals a great deal about you. And when you choose to use it as a tool for soul growth, a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading can be tremendously helpful for learning your soul's true purpose and in this lifetime and how to move towards your highest destiny. It can also show you your past life karma and the patterns of behavior that developed out of it, and so were probably repeated early in this lifetime, and how these particular behavioral patterns might be affecting your current relationships, your current choice of career or job, your current financial status or health status. But a reading can also help you better understand if and where these soul conditioned patterns may no longer serve you. So we look at what's tripped you up in the past and how to entertain new perspectives in order to make different choices that allow you to gain greater insight through astrological insight, or greater awareness, I should say, through astrological insight that ultimately brings greater happiness and satisfaction into your life now and in the future. Now, all of this is easy when you take advantage of my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Simply email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll get your reading scheduled as soon as possible. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. And finally, before I get into the meat of this week's show, I'd like to tell you about a 4-hour online workshop I'll be conducting for the Astrological Society of Princeton, known as ASP, on Saturday, June 25th. It's called I Can't Get No Karmic Relief, or Can I? And the first part of this workshop will be designated to teaching you how to read a chart from the evolutionary point of view, meaning through the lens of the journey of your soul beginning early in this lifetime and or carried over from past lifetimes or many past lifetimes, depending on your belief about reincarnation. Now, my studies have included facilitating many past life regressions that have confirmed my belief that the soul is energy and therefore does not die with the physical body, but rather reincarnates from one lifetime into the other. Into another. And it's under this assumption that evolutionary astrology can guide us to recognize how our soul has been conditioned through past relationships, life events, lived circumstances, etc., based on the choices we made then, and then how often we bring the results of such habitual soul conditioned responses into this current lifetime, both positive and negative. So this knowledge, in addition to giving us more than just a simple glimpse into our karmic past, can help us make different choices for our future. Choices that can result in greater contentment, happiness, and success, and change our karmic future for the better as we move toward both identifying and achieving our highest destiny in this lifetime. Now, that'll be the first part of the workshop. The second part of the workshop, I'll examine several individual participants' charts using this evolutionary chart delineation technique. So if you'd like to attend, the date again is Saturday, June 25th, approximately a month from today, from 1 to 5 p.m. And the cost is $30 for ASP members and $50 for non-members. So just shoot me an email at SHERI, again, it's SHERI at karmicevolution.com, and I will forward the link to sign up as soon as ASP gets it up on their website. All right, and if you have any questions about it, obviously you can direct them to me. And if you'd like to submit your chart, even if you haven't signed up yet because they don't have it up on their website yet, it should be, sometime beginning next week they'll have it up. But if you'd like to submit your chart data to me, please do. You can send it to me through that email address. All right, so let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. And let's first take a closer look at what's happened recently between the Taurus New Moon solar eclipse on April 30th and the May 16th Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse on May 16th, and the pending Gemini New Moon coming up on May 30th. That includes, well, a couple of shooting tragedies, right? Collective events that have horrified most of society, both in and out of the United States. So if we've been paying attention, first, I want to point out, we know that the first of this season's 2022 solar eclipses for this year, alerted us to the fact that we had to weed our inner gardens to rid ourselves of old values and beliefs that stymie the planting of new ones. This Taurus New Moon solar eclipse revealed to us that it was necessary to eradicate the old by their roots so that we could make space to plant new beliefs based on more up-to-date and relevant values to our current times. And the catalyst, at least within the American collective, centered on the May 2nd news of the Supreme Court leaked draft of the decision by conservative Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito that would presumably overturn the 49-year constitutional right to abortion precedent set by Roe versus Wade in 1973. After May 2nd, only a few days after that solar eclipse occurred, and the same day Venus entered warrior-like Aries, where she was joined later by Jupiter in Aries on May 10th, we witnessed protests and marches at both the nation's and the state's capitals throughout the country. Right? Remember, Jupiter is higher law, legislatures, and stuff like that. Aries is action, motion, fighting, etc. So Fast forward to the May 16th Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, which brought us the tragic, racially motivated shooting of 9 Black people at a supermarket in Buffalo by an 18-year-old white supremacist. Now, this eclipse revealed that racial inequality or racial equality is still an issue in this country, but reminded us as well that change is possible and that any changes we refuse to make willingly will likely be thrust upon us. So, in other words, what was revealed here was of a more lunar nature, which is the hidden destructive tendencies of prejudice and hatred for particular groups of people. And so, again, the warning signs, because this was in Scorpio, is that if we refuse to make any changes, they're going to be thrust upon us. So why is that? Because, as I've said before, evolution is impossible without adaptation, and adaptation naturally means change. Why? Because no change means we'll become useless and ultimately extinct. So that lunation asked us to live up to our constitutional principles, at least here in the US, that all people are created equal, and therefore discrimination against one is discrimination against all. The universe has no use for meaningless excuses about resistance to change, because such excuses aren't conducive to its overall long-term survival. That is Pluto in a nutshell. Now, since May 16th, till now, as of today, the monthly lunar cycle's been waning, and we've been asked to continue to release our resistance or any resistance to change that might ultimately threaten our ability to evolve, meaning therefore adapt in order to survive, never mind thrive. And this, of course, as I mentioned before, comes under the umbrella of the current U.S. Pluto return, which brings us the potential recurrence or repeat of energies from 1776 at the signing of the Declaration of Independence and after, which, of course, occurred. I believe they'd already started fighting in 1775, but between 1776 and 1787, we had the Revolutionary War. And of course, the Declaration of Independence marks the beginning of that. Although, like I said, I believe fighting actually commenced earlier than that, and culminated with the Bill of Rights in 1787, the adaptation of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So we're in that period now, as I've said before. And the U.S. Pluto return, in addition, and this Pluto return basically lasts about another year before Pluto moves into Aquarius for the next 20 years in February 2024. It's going to move off the exact degree of 27. I've forgotten exactly what the minutes are offhand. But still, it's in effect. And the Pluto return has been dredging up all of the hidden Pandora's box of ills that plague the world or plague this nation, including hatred, bigotry, misogyny, intolerance, greed, sexual abuse, the quest for power at any cost. Well, greed covers money, I guess, and much, much more. So if you've been listening to this show recently, you've doubtless heard me say this before, but here it pays to remember that another archetypal energy associated with Pluto is reform, because when you think about it, Pluto's a collective planet. So reform means to all aspects that affect us as members of a society, be they political, legal, religious, societal mores, etc. So the U.S. Pluto return likewise dredges up from the bowels of our unconscious how we've ignored the need to reform our laws to be in greater alignment with the truth. Now that not just, the truth, which is that now not just white landholding men are equal, because equality extends to each and every one of us human beings. Now, I went on about that at length last week, so thank you for indulging me again. But earlier this week, just 2 days ago on May 24th, and just hours before Mars entered its own sign of Aries, an 18-year-old gunman entered an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, and shot and killed 19 children and 2 teachers with an AR-15 rifle and a large supply of reloadable ammunition. Before that, he shot his grandmother at her home, and as far as I know, she's still alive, but also still in the hospital, the last I heard on the news. As we know, the entire community, state, nation, and more are grieving, and this grieving has been accompanied by calls for immediate action to toughen gun laws, something that's been resisted in this country since before the Columbine High School shooting in 1991. So let's take a look now at the chart of this tragic massacre, which is dated May 24th, 2022 at 11:32 a.m. in Uvalde, Texas. That's Uvalde. We note first that the sun's in Gemini, which is the archetypal sign of early childhood learning, and therefore grammar schools and other places in which elementary learning occurs, among other things. And of course, Gemini is local or near neighborhood. So, and you know, it's early childhood is young people. And we see that at that date, time, and location, shooting up a grammar school class was certainly neither astrologically predicted nor expected. However, once the event occurred, astrologers often look for exactly what ignited such an action. So it's no surprise to most astrologers that as Mars reached the last degree of Pisces and approached his union with Jupiter in Aries, that something in the collective might go bang. In addition, we see that the moon was sandwiched between Neptune and Mars at 2713 Pisces, and that Mars, still at the tail end of Pisces, was approaching his conjunction, as I said, with Jupiter and Aries, an aspect which actually doesn't perfect until later this week on May 29th. Now, bear in mind that faster moving planets, and the moon's the fastest, often act as triggers. So the moon's proximity to both Neptune and Mars denotes the potential for delusional thinking that then segues into action. And here, obviously, violent action. Now, you know, it's so interesting because in astrology, right, Moon Neptune is a psychic signature. Moon Neptune is dreamy. Moon Neptune is creative. It's not necessarily verbal, it's more visual. But, you know, every single archetype and every single archetypal conversation has its high side and its low side. So its high side, of course, is the ability to communicate with those in other dimensions and to either know or see things, to be clairaudient, clairvoyant, clairsentient, and all that stuff. But on the other hand, at its lowest form, it's just delusional. You know, it's emotions that may have been infiltrated by others or energies within the collective when it's in Pisces that cause it to feel or think in ways that aren't logical, you know? And so the moon is always about security, what makes us feel secure, right? And we want to feel part of the collective, but you know, in a situation like this, the moon Neptune with Mars in the mix said, oh, I feel threatened and therefore I need to lash out or act out in some way that the shooter probably undoubtedly thought was self-protective, you know, or was protective of others. Now, personally, I thought something of an explosive nature would happen, but closer to the exact conjunction of Mars and Jupiter at Aries, which, you know, as I said, perfects on May 19th. So when I wrote about this waxing Mars-Jupiter conjunction in my weekly blog, which I posted on the 24th, no, I posted on the 20, yeah, no, I did post it on Tuesday on Facebook and Instagram, but I posted it before I knew the shooting had occurred. And I noted the following, and I quote, "This aspect's also known to cause explosions. So don't be surprised if something goes boom in the collective between now and then." So clearly something went boom, right? Now, this chart shows a 8-degree, 35-minute Leo rising. And I'd start by pointing out that in addition to the sun in Gemini, like I said, a lot of teachers are leonine in nature. And that's primarily because the best ones love to be in front of the room or the classroom, think theater or on the stage, and also include those who teach by entertaining their students. Leo's the sign of children, so teaching in the lower level grades, meaning grammar school through high school, fits that bill. And Leo's also an archetypal sign that often includes drama. Again, because Leo's associated with being on the stage and acting, performing, etc. I thought of a very amusing little story that, that came to me about my son that sort of illustrates what I'm talking about, how teachers, they're up on the stage, right, in front of the classroom. They have to perform to a certain extent, and the better they do, the more attention children, especially young children, are going to pay. And I remember my son, who in 3rd grade declared that he hated social studies because when he was doing his homework, he whined to me that he said, it's not like I'm ever going to use it or anything. And I remember laughing and saying, honey, that's what most kids say about math. But you come home and the first thing you knock off is your math homework with like no problem. Social studies is really, though, just reading and reading comprehension. And at the time, he scored high in both math and reading comprehension on those, standardized tests. So regardless, fast forward to early middle school, and he comes home one day, and when I asked how his day was, he tells me excitedly that a social studies teacher who was teaching them about the Civil War had a piece of a soldier's uniform with real blood on it, he said. So, of course, my kid's an Aries sun, right? But I remember also it was an election year, and I remember seeing on back to school night that the teacher had in the front of the classroom 2 life-size cardboard cutouts of the 2 presidential candidates. And I remember thinking, wow, this teacher's really leonine because she brings what she teaches to life in front of the students, and it works. So anyway, back to the Ulvide chart. This aggressive, warlike act, killing innocent children with a weapon designed for war, occurred as Mars hit 29 degrees and 47 minutes Pisces. And again, as I've noted several times, approached a conjunction to Jupiter, which was at 2 degrees and 31 minutes of Aries. Now, 29 degrees of any sign is known as an anaretic degree in astrology, and that means it's considered unstable. Having spent the duration of the past 29 degrees in one sign, an anaretic degrees getting ready to segue into the next sign, but the feeling of that next sign is unfamiliar. Now, this is, of course, true for both fast and slow moving planets. And bear in mind that it won't be long before Pluto reaches the anaretic degree of 29 Capricorn, which it will do circa February 12th of 2023, meaning the shock can be on one hand greater when it occurs, but also may allow for slower adjustment because it's transited by Pluto, which is the slowest moving planet, meaning it'll stay at that sign for far longer than a faster moving planet. However, any planet, regardless of its speed, which transits from empathic, spiritual, compassionate, meditative, creative Pisces at the end of the zodiac to action-oriented, impatient, impetuous Aries, I would like to say trigger happy, right? Aries can become quite disoriented, to say the least, when it hits that anaretic 29th degree. It's like going from a nice, safe, warm, cozy womb into the bright lights and loud voices of the delivery room at birth. That's part of the reason why Mars Aries rules the first house in Western tropical astrology, because it represents the movement from the 12th Piscean Neptunian house out of the womb and into the actual physical incarnate body. And that can be quite a shock. And for Mars, which moves into a new sign every 2.2 months, and being, well, like Mars, the move from Pisces to Aries can be quite a powerfully disorienting one. I remember one of my old astrology teachers used to say that Mars in Pisces is like trying to hammer a nail with a dead fish. But Mars in Aries is like trying to outpace a train that's speeding along the tracks at 100 miles an hour. So such disorientation at the time of the shooting, which was further complicated, shall we say, by Mars' approach to Jupiter already in Aries. And we all know Jupiter as an expansive energy. And with Mars hard on his heels at the 29 Pisces anaretic degree, which is again to say a bit confused or discombobulated, this combo apparently acted like a match thrown on gasoline. Think of it this way. Mars and Pisces might be motivated to hike to the mountaintop, find sanctuary in the monastery there, take a vow of silence, and pray for world peace. However, as Mars hits Aries, and at 29 degrees, he begins to feel it coming. He's like, whoa, I better get out of here and do something quick. So he hightails it down the mountain, impetuously picks up a gun, and impatiently hunts for what? With the sun in Gemini, and if we look at the fact that a massacre of young children occurred during this exact period, we see someone killing curiosity, communication, and youthful new perceptions in the form of young people who are most prone to engage innocently in such activities. Again, while I'm well aware that events may occur related to planetary and zodiacal archetypal meanings several days prior to their exact aspect, I didn't think something would happen as soon as May 24th for a particularly explosive aspect like Mars-Jupiter conjunction that wasn't perfecting until 5 days later. However, it does prove my point that some aspects, especially those in or approaching Aries or involving its ruler Mars, especially in a case where it's approaching, expansive Jupiter, might combine to combust early. And something that I definitely believe to be true. So often by the time any given aspect actually occurs, the energy is zapped, gone, over and done with. Sometimes, but clearly not always. So I just wanted to point that out. But this also means there's room for more potential events of an Aryan nature because this exact Mars-Jupiter has not perfected yet. We still have 3 days or so. For example, the last time Mars conjoined Jupiter, it was in Capricorn on March 20th of 2020, right when the coronavirus was taking such a toll that bodies were piling up in refrigerated trucks outside of morgues in places like New York City. And on August 4th of 2020, when Mars and Aries made an exact waxing square to Jupiter in Capricorn, there was a massive chemical explosion at the Beirut port in Lebanon, which killed at least 216 people and injured more than 6,500 people. So astrologers know that this is an extremely potentially explosive combo, as much as it can also be a particularly lucky one for some, depending on where it falls in one's chart and what it aspects there. So let's talk now about the approaching Gemini moon on May 30th. I'd like to switch to a more symbolic interpretation of what's happened between these two recent eclipses and what these lunations actually symbolize for us on a higher level. And what I mean by that is, how can we extrapolate greater meaning from recent events correlated to these astrological energies so that we can grow in consciousness both collectively and individually? And we know that the Buffalo shooter was racist and that his intent was to stop what he thought of as, quote, the replacement theory, meaning that blacks and other minorities will soon outnumber whites in this country. So he shot and killed black people, theoretically to both reduce their number, excuse me, and to make a statement. And, well, clearly he's delusional too, right? Clearly the shooter believed a delusional conspiracy theory, one which happens to be promoted widely by media outlets like Fox News, on social media and from other right-wing outlets. So on a higher symbolic level, as mentioned last week, he chose to slaughter those at a supermarket, which on, again, a more symbolic level, I was talking about Venus going to Aries and stuff like that. And Venus as the ruler of the Taurus North Node, that to which we're supposed to move forward towards, right? Peace, harmony, stability, calm, serenity. But again, the symbolism of somebody taking out a members of a group that he's prejudiced against and fears symbolizes his at a supermarket where they're going to buy food that is one of the major resources that sustains our lives, that his attempt on a symbolic level is to starve them to death, right? Because if you do that, then, and you do that to a group of people, they will die out, and you'll feel safe and whatever, it's crazy, right? But it still is symbolic. And the shooter in Uvalde, Texas, on the most symbolic level, sought to stop young people, read children, Gemini, from learning, again, Gemini, through the exchange of information, again, Gemini, that leads eventually and theoretically to higher consciousness, which is Jupiter's domain. So remember, Gemini represents the building blocks of knowledge, starting with ABC and 1 + 1 = 2, which we all need to learn in order to be able to read, write, and calculate. And calculation is based on logic. So the Gemini archetype represents the roots of how we learn to think and communicate. Note that the shooter killed also the messengers of those elementary building blocks by slaughtering 2 teachers there as well. Tragic? Yeah, of course. Preventable? Definitely, given the resistance to gun reform in this country. If we can only wean our elected officials away from their addiction to corporate lobbying money that fuels their campaigns, and that's inherent also in what's emerging out of all these things from the Scorpio South Node, the Pandora's box of ills, as I said before. Anyone watching or reading the recent news has already seen the beginning of this, as parents of children massacred in other school shooting tragedies are yet again speaking out. Legislators are speaking out. But this time, however, they are naming names. And again, other legislators are doing the same, which is something I think they have been reluctant to do over past years. You don't usually see, say, for example, Democrats calling out Republicans, but you don't see them actually being specific by saying so-and-so took $4 million over the last 10 years from the National Rifle Association. And these are the kinds of things that I think we might start seeing more of, because everybody's like, this is serious now, stop fooling around now. Anyway, any confusion that the Gemini archetype brings in the form of mis or disinformation, deceptive wordplay, especially now that Gemini is still, Mercury is still retrograde, although it's in Taurus, which I pointed out last week or the week before, is now about valuing your resources, right? Food, water, shelter, right? Where are you going to be safe? Is it in a supermarket? No. Is it in a school? No. We've known that for a long time. Is it in your house? Maybe, maybe not. Right? But the less safe you are outside, the more unsafe you might feel inside too, depending on where you are. So the Gemini archetype brings in the form of mis and disinformation, deceptive wordplay, propaganda, and twisted logic. And they all show us Gemini energy's shadow side. But what's at stake now as we approach this Gemini new moon is clarity of both thought and communication. Does 1 + 1 = 2 or not? Does CAT spell cat? You know, the furry creature that comes running when it hears the can opener and or curls up on your lap when you're reading, watching TV, or worse yet, on your keyboard while you're working? Does it CAT spell cat or not? Some facts are indisputable. Now, at this upcoming Gemini New Moon, we have the opportunity to recognize this concept as fact and to act accordingly. So looking back, it's clear that Mercury retrograde's earthy trine to Pluto on Capricorn on May 25th, the day after this last shooting, concerned us with the deeper issues of life and called us to turn inward for a greater self-understanding of what kind of society we live in. And it indicates that going deep for such answers may well pay off now. And when Venus squares Pluto on May 16th or 17th, depending on your time zone, it's clear that emotions have already become intense. So this aspect can mean the deepening within our relationships, or that current commitments may either change or break down. The message: don't pretend everything's copacetic when it's not, and resist using subversive or coercive tactics or verbal acrobatics with Mercury retrograde to avoid change now. And I think that the reactions by certain politicians who have been supportive of blocking any gun control measures in this country, especially after this most recent set of tragedies, I think their reactions speak for themselves here. So we all know, you know, that it's the same old for them. Venus, now also ruling, as I said, Mercury retrograde, enters serene, calm, pleasure-loving, and values-oriented Taurus on May 28th, which is where she will slow down, smell the flowers, and take time to decide what holds true value for her, meaning for each of us. So this may cool our jets a little for a while as we continue to evaluate how Saturn's square to the transiting karmic nodes, which is still in aspect, and Saturn's going to retrograde next week. So we'll talk about that on next week's show because it happens after that. And, you know, stay within proximity again of the nodes, or squaring the nodes. And also, as I've mentioned numerous times, he's going to start over the summer to move back into a tighter square with Uranus and Taurus by the fall, by September. So we can continue to evaluate now how Saturn can both represent the resistance to moving into a new set of values in the future, but also help us resist the existing power structure that refuses to make any changes as we continue to experience here in the US the Pluto return. So, you know, despite risk-averse Taurus, or Venus and Taurus, the temptation to gamble or speculate becomes high also when Mars meets Jupiter in Aries, May 29th, rendering risk-taking, and here I'm thinking of things like the stock market or, you know, really down to any more minor risk. It renders it, well, you know, risky. Now, I've outlined already, and we'll come back in a bit to it again, but when the Gemini New Moon occurs, it'll be at 9 degrees and 3 minutes, and at 4:30 a.m. Pacific and 7:30 a.m. Eastern on May 30th. It will invite us all to plant seeds that allow us to create the desire to learn, to open our minds up to information that can teach us something new, different, and useful, because it will form the foundational basis of how we think. And that in turn relates to how we communicate. So a Gemini new moon always calls us to stop talking so much and begin to learn to listen. Ruled by the Roman god Mercury and the Greek god Hermes, Mercury was the only deity in ancient mythology able to traverse all dimensions. As I've mentioned on previous shows, the lower realm of our subconscious, the earthly realm, and that of higher knowledge and greater consciousness, depicted in Greek mythology anyway by Mount Olympus. So while many often think of Gemini as flighty, fickle, too inquisitive, or too chatty, and remember the lowest manifestation of the Gemini archetype is gossip, its real purpose revolves around asking questions and understanding the answers. Think of your 4-year-old self, or 4-year-old child or grandchild, or any average 4-year-old preschool student who's at that why stage of their development. Mommy, why is the sky blue? Mommy, why do I have to go to sleep at night? Daddy, is there really one such thing as the moon? The Gemini New Moon advises us to never lose such curiosity about ourselves, others, our environment, and/or our lives. However, the key to truly understanding the Gemini archetype lies with its deeper meaning that the answers to such questions form our perception of ourselves, others, and the world around us. And whether these perceptions become tainted by our experiences is not really the question. They always do. Without the ability to perceive, we wouldn't have our great thinkers, artists, philosophers, or metaphysical magicians, right? Observation correlation became at some point the entire foundation for scientific thought. However, Gemini energy includes also sharing information, thus its connotation with communication. Some questions we might ask ourselves this week as the monthly lunar cycle begins, which will begin on May 30th, will continue to wax after that. And these questions include, through what lens do I perceive the world around me and the people in it? Do I perceive objectively or solely through negative experiences from my past? Can I be more objective in interpreting what I hear or see without always going into default mode, meaning subjective or read emotional reactions? And can I listen more than I speak and understand the bigger meaning or the larger meaning or the higher meaning or the higher purpose in what I see or hear? Proof of some of what the Gemini moon asks of us can be found in the collective, as even though this lunation hasn't hit yet, we head into it now. For example, I noted that earlier this week, I think it was actually a story that ran on Tuesday, but it was obviously written before this Texas massacre took firm hold of the airwaves. Dr. Anthony Fauci gave a commencement speech at Princeton University's graduation ceremony, and this was on May 24th. And the local New Jersey Patch newspaper ran a headline that, and here I'm going to quote from the paper: Fauci warns against, quote, normalization of untruths at Princeton class day. On Monday, Dr. Anthony Fauci told Princeton students it was society's collective responsibility not to accept falsehoods. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, spoke to Princeton's graduating class of 2022 on Monday, highlighting the lack of health equity and the collective responsibility against the normalization of untruths. Fauci was this year's class day speaker at Princeton University. In the university's first in-person class day in 2 years, Fauci was inducted as an honorary class member during the celebration and didn't mince words when talking about how COVID-19 divided this nation. I have spent my entire professional career in Washington, D.C. as a scientist, a physician, and a public health official. Although that career path is fundamentally devoid of politics in the classic sense, being in Washington has allowed me to experience firsthand the intensity of the divisiveness in our nation, Fauci told graduates. What troubles me is that differences of opinion or ideology have in certain situations been reflected by egregious distortions of reality. Sadly, elements of our society have grown increasingly inured to a cacophony of falsehoods and lies that often stand largely unchallenged, ominously leading to an insidious acceptance of what I call the normalization of untruth. Fauci said he saw falsehoods propagated through certain platforms and some elected officials in positions of power. Yet the outrage and dissent against this alarming trend has been muted and mild, he said. So I would relate that, as I noted, to the Gemini new moon that's occurring, because it's going to ask us to think about these things. Precisely as I said before, how did we learn? How did that affect our thought process? Where do our perceptions based on our actual experiences sort of temper, taint, or change the objectivity of what we learn simply through observation, right? And how can we make some progress to say, oh, well, just because every time this happened, I felt this way, does that mean that, if it happens again, I'm going to feel that way? These are very, deep and difficult things, although it sounds like something trivial that we are faced with now. But the other meaning is more, we're going to see it at the Sag full moon 2 weeks after the Gemini new moon, which is about the Sagittarius moon reminding the Gemini sun that the details are fine, but they mean nothing without access to the higher meaning and the patterns behind it, So, as I said, 1 + 1 = 2, but how do you get from there to calculus? I mean, many of us don't, myself included. But I was raised by a father who did, because he taught math in college, right? So the point is, there's a whole host. If you cut yourself off, and that was my point in saying that some of the symbolism of the shooter having chosen a grammar school as his target, and any shooter that chose any school as a target, is attempting to assassinate learning. And in that sense, they are attempting to stop creative thinking, stop critical thinking. Is it any wonder that, some of these idiots think that critical race theory is being taught in kindergarten? I've mentioned this before. I have a son in law school. Critical race theory is taught in law school, and for a damn good reason. But there's such ignorance, right? So the Gemini new moon says, let's revive our excitement about remembering what it was like when we were in first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, junior high school, middle school, whatever they call it now. And put some of that back into our life instead of shutting it all down. But at the same time, to use our critical thinking skills to actually discern between fact and fiction, between truth and conspiracy theories, or truth and lies, right? And I pulled out another article that I thought was interesting because it touches on the gun rights issue. And this is a headline and a story that I believe is from the Times, New York Times, that said, in the wake of massacres, the Supreme Court is poised to expand gun rights. Talk about being out of touch, right? Because if 1 + 1 = 2, then how do you get 3, right? If we've seen more and more and more and more and more people die from gun massacres, how does expanding gun rights make any sense? Okay, that's the point that I'm trying to make with the Gemini new moon. So this says out of Washington, in the coming weeks, with the nation reeling from mass shootings in New York and Texas, the Supreme Court is set to issue a major decision on what states may do to limit carrying guns in public. Based on the justices' questions when the case was argued in November, they are likely to strike down a New York law that requires people seeking a license to carry a handgun in public to show, quote, proper cause. The decision will be the court's first significant statement on the scope of Second Amendment rights outside the home. In 2008, in ruling that the amendment protects an individual right untied to militia service, the court said only that law-abiding citizens have a constitutional right to keep guns in their homes for self-defense. The new case, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, is a test of constitutionality laws requiring licenses for carrying guns in public. California, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Rhode Island have similar laws to the one in New York. At the argument, several justices said the New York law imposes an intolerable burden on the rights guaranteed by the Second Amendment. Quote, you don't have to say when you're looking for a permit to speak on a street corner or whatever that, you know, your speech is particularly important, Chief Justice John Roberts said. So why do you have to show in this case, convince somebody that you're entitled to exercise your Second Amendment right? But several justices seemed open to allowing the state to exclude guns from crowded public settings or other sensitive places. Indeed, the 2008 decision, District of Columbia versus Heller, indicated that the court would be prepared to sustain at least some gun control laws, including ones banning guns in school, which already would be like, I don't know, the Ted Cruz or whoever and Abbott, Governor Abbott, they're already like, let's just arm the teachers. Yeah, because that'll work, right? And then the rest of this article says, this is a quote, nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on longstanding prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill. Yeah, if you can identify them, right, before they actually get hold of a gun, because we don't need a background check, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, like where Supreme Court justices work, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. Justice Antonin Scalia, who died in 2006, wrote for the majority. Meanwhile, I wanted to point out that Jupiter's approaching Chiron in Aries, that started to be apparent with this shooter chart from Uvalde, Texas, but they're too wide apart at that time, or at this time. But I wanted to posit that since this horrible event occurred again with Mars at the anaretic 29-degree Pisces, that it won't be until March 11th of 2023 when Jupiter Chiron exact conjunct in Aries. And that may or may not bring some kind of action or some kind of, I won't say resolution, but I will say notice of victims, whereby maybe some kind of legislation or something is going to make it through the damn Senate, and I'd remind everyone too that Jupiter Chiron is an aspect that's in Donald Trump's chart, and that, his is in Libra in the second house and is joined also by Juno. And I've long said that Jupiter Chiron frictional aspects, whether it's the conjunction, the square, or the opposition, symbolize a wound to one's sense of faith. And again, I mentioned that, I think, well, I didn't mention it this time, but I'm saying that, since Jupiter represents the law and the legal system, or what we would also call Jupiter's higher law, or like what I referred to recently, the law of nature, we can see how this manifested for Donald Trump, who has used the legal system as a delaying tactic his whole life by simply filing countersuits and appeals to tie up any cases against him for years and sometimes decades. We also know that Trump's inherent wound, his profound distrust of and disdain for the law, has led him to a position of prominence on the world stage. And funnily enough, he's a Leo rising, right? Whereby he's had the power to stack the Supreme Court with right-wing justices. So, I mentioned the book last week by Elie Mystal, Mystal. And again, I don't have the exact title. I will have to get that and post it somewhere. But it's the black guy's retort to the U.S. Constitution or something like that. But you can find it on Amazon. And he's the justice correspondent for the publication The Nation, which actually was an abolitionist. It was started as an abolitionist publication in the 1800s. And he talks about how these 3 Trump-appointed justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, will likely stay or hold their positions on the bench for approximately the next 50 years or so. So given how out of touch they are, along with other conservative members of the court like Samuel Alito and sometimes Chief Justice Roberts, and I think more often Roberts, with the will of the American people, this doesn't bode well for America's future, the seeds of which are being planted now as we go through the Pluto return. And Maistel, by the way, uses this scenario as his argument for expanding the Supreme Court beyond its current 9 justices, something that has been done before in American history. So it's not a completely new concept, but you know, it's unlikely to happen, but it's just an interesting thing. All right, so I hope that didn't get too jumbled at the end, because I jumped around there a little bit. But again, I think I made my points about the Gemini New Moon and what's been leading up to it, right? What's important, what's not important, what are our most important values, how do we sustain our resources, including, you know, our own physical body, which I talked about last week, and to recognize that these recent incidents are trying to deprive people of sustenance and which is to deprive them of faith. And that goes to these massacres that have also happened in houses of worship over the past few years, as well as deprive children the right to learn so that they can ultimately level it up to a higher level of consciousness. So thanks everyone for joining me today. And I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, June 2nd, for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.